Look everybody, I've caught the golden snitch. That's 150 points to Ravenclaw, and that means we win the game automatically. That seems like a pretty poor setup for a sports game, right? But it actually does make sense on some level. Not as a sports game, but as symbolism. Let's talk about why. So in the game of Quidditch, as described in the Harry Potter books and movies, the Seeker is the only one who can end a Quidditch game. They end the game by catching the golden snitch, which earns them 150 points for their team, and because that's such a large number of points in proportion to how much a single goal is worth, that means that they nearly always win. Now, that's not always the case. For example, in Book 4, Goblet of Fire, at the Quidditch World Cup, the Bulgarian seeker Victor Krum catches the golden snitch. But because the Irish team was ahead by quite a lot in terms of goals scored with the quaffle, the Irish team still wins the game. There can also be situations like in the final Quidditch game of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Book 3, where it's Gryffindor versus Slytherin, and Harry needs to wait until the Gryffindor team is a certain number of points ahead before he tries to catch the golden snitch. If he catches it before that point, then they will win in the game against Slytherin, but they will only come in second in the Quidditch Cup overall. However, in the vast majority of cases, what a Quidditch game comes down to is only who catches the golden snitch first, and that does seem like it's maybe not that well set up. It makes much more sense if you look at it in terms of the symbolic meanings that are attached to it, and I wanted to talk about that now since I'm doing this video series about symbolism in popular media. So basically what I'm getting at here is that the most prominent Quidditch player in the Harry Potter series is of course Harry himself, and Harry plays the position of Seeker. He's actually the youngest Seeker in a century, being the rare exception to the rule that first years usually aren't allowed on their house Quidditch teams. Over the course of this series, it also becomes apparent that Harry is not only the boy who lived, but also the chosen one of a prophecy, and most likely the only one capable of defeating Voldemort. In the last 3 books after Voldemort's return to power, there are many characters who make important contributions to the fight against Voldemort. People like Ron and Hermione, Dumbledore, the members of Dumbledore's army, and the Order of the Phoenix. But ultimately, Harry is the only one who can stand against him, and it really has to come down to the 2 of them. Does that sound familiar at all? There are lots of people making contributions, but ultimately it comes down to these 2 people. However, think of it in these terms. If you had one team that had all 7 players, and the other team was just a Seeker on their own, the Seeker wouldn't win. The one who's playing Seeker by themselves. They couldn't possibly win because the other team, they would have to play all 7 roles by themselves. They would have to guard the goalposts and try and score goals and try to catch the golden snitch, because there would be nobody else to do that. So when you have Voldemort with all of these massive numbers of people on his side, his followers and the people he has under the Imperious Curse and the werewolves and the Dementors and various kinds of dark creatures that are on his side, if it was just Harry going up against him alone, he wouldn't stand a chance. And that's not me trying to insult Harry or whatever, I'm just saying nobody could possibly succeed on their own up against all of that. Even though the final battle does come down to a one-on-one duel between Harry and Voldemort, Harry only got that far because of Ron and Hermione going on that long camping trip with him all year, because of everything that Dumbledore did and put in place and helped him with in the years leading up to that, because of everything that the Order of the Phoenix has been doing all year, because of the students and teachers who stayed to fight and defend Hogwarts. So that's his Quidditch team. Also, I think it's worth pointing out that even though Harry doesn't play Quidditch at all in Book 7 because he has quite a bit more on his plate to deal with than, Quidditch games, and he's not back at Hogwarts, he does spend the year chasing after small items that have the potential to change the game for everybody. I think that the quest to find and destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes very strongly resembles the role of the Seeker in Quidditch. In fact, one of the final ones, the Ravenclaw diadem, he catches while flying on a broom through hazardous conditions. So basically what I'm saying is that for the book and movie series as a whole, the role of Seeker is highly symbolic of the role that Harry plays in the main conflict against Voldemort. It foreshadows it, it represents it. The reason it doesn't make so much sense as a game is because it's operating mainly as a symbol of Harry's importance and significance. However, Harry is not the only character to play Seeker, and he's also not the only one for whom his role as a Seeker is symbolic or representative of something more important about their role in the story. So let's talk about some of the others. Now, I want to make it clear that I don't think every character who plays Seeker has some kind of, that represents something in a symbolic way about their role in the story. For example, I'm pretty sure that the Hufflepuff Seeker after Cedric and the Slytherin Seeker before Malfoy were just because Harry had to play against someone. They didn't really have any significance in the story outside of their role in that particular Quidditch game. I also don't think that the fact that Cho was a Seeker is very significant in like a symbolic sort of way. It's the way that Harry got to know her because of course she's not in the same year or the same house as him, and so playing Seeker against her would allow him to see her as a rival, but not in a hostile kind of way, just in a friendly, competitive way, and give her a chance to attract his attention. I think that that's the main purpose of Cho playing Seeker because unfortunately she's not really given a lot to do in the story outside of her role as a love interest for Harry and Cedric. However, I think it's definitely worth noting that aside from Harry, both Cedric Diggory and Victor Crumb play Seeker, meaning that at least 3 out of the 4 Triwizard Champions play Seeker. Now, we don't know if Fleur Delacour plays Quidditch at all, but I think that it makes sense in a way that Seekers would be more likely to be chosen as Triwizard Champions. I think Quidditch players in general might be more likely to enter, and in fact, I think that all of the characters that we're told entered for Hogwarts were in fact Quidditch players, because Cedric, of course, was the one that was chosen, and Harry also, but he didn't actually enter. Angelina Johnson from the Gryffindor Quidditch team entered, Warrington from the Slytherin Quidditch team entered, and Fred and George, who also play on the Gryffindor team, tried to enter. Unsuccessfully. Now, why would this be the case? My guess would be, first of all, from a practical, like this is a fictional story kind of standpoint, Harry's peer group is too young to enter the Triwizard Tournament, and among the older students from other houses, the ones who have been mentioned before are highly likely to be Quidditch players, because Quidditch is a context in which Harry interacts with characters who are not in Gryffindor or in his year. However, within the story, looking at it from like a what would the character's motivations be kind of standpoint, it makes sense in a different way. They're used to relatively high-stakes, dangerous competitions that put them in the spotlight, and that's essentially what the Triwizard Tournament is, but just taken up to a different level. So even though it's not strictly a sports competition, it does make sense that there would be a correlation. And then as far as Seeker in particular, well, Seekers are the ones responsible for the outcome of the game, and so being the only person responsible or the main person responsible for winning or losing for your entire house, that's not that different from being the only person responsible for winning or losing this tournament for your entire school. And I think that that's something that's relatively constant for major characters or even relatively important supporting characters who play the role of Seeker. They take on challenges and responsibilities that are well beyond what anybody would expect of them, either for good or for bad. For example, let's talk about Draco Malfoy. He and Harry are foil characters, so just for that reason alone, it absolutely makes sense that he would play the same position on a rival Quidditch team. However, I think it's also highly symbolic of his storyline in the 6th book. At that point, he is recruited by Voldemort as a Death Eater, and he's given this ridiculously difficult, supposed to be impossible mission, which is to assassinate Dumbledore. And despite everybody thinking that that was just absolutely impossible, he actually comes very close to succeeding at it, and really only doesn't succeed because he doesn't have it in him to do it. And also it's worth mentioning that much in the same way that Harry doesn't play Seeker during Deathly Hallows because he has, much more important things to worry about, Malfoy stops playing Seeker during Half-Blood Prince because he also has much bigger things to worry about. Malfoy's story in Half-Blood Prince is in many ways a dark mirror image to Harry's storyline over the last couple of books as a whole. And so I think it's very appropriate that he played the role of Seeker and then gives up the role of Seeker in favor of something much more serious. I think that there's definitely something going on there that's very symbolic. Ginny Weasley is another character who plays the role of Seeker, but actually usually doesn't and doesn't prefer to. And I think that that is really significant. So Ginny originally joins the Quidditch team as the Seeker after Umbridge kicks Harry off of the team, supposedly giving him a lifetime ban, but it really only lasts a few months. So Ginny takes on the role of Gryffindor Seeker in Harry's place, but then when he is reinstated, she instead tries out for Chaser, which is the role that she plays during Book 6. Ginny says that she prefers playing Chaser, and that's the position that she goes on to play in the long term, including professionally after the book series is over. However, she does play Seeker again one more time, which is towards the end of Half-Blood Prince in the final game, Gryffindor vs. Ravenclaw, when Harry is in detention with Snape. So basically, she plays the role of Chaser, but she steps up and plays Seeker when Harry's not available. And I think that that is really significant for one important reason. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry is away, it's Ginny, Neville, and Luna who step up and take that leadership role in Dumbledore's army and bring the group back together and start their own new resistance movement against the Carrows. Ginny is one of the ones who takes on that responsibility. Nobody asked her to, nobody expects her to, but she does it anyway because it's the right thing to do and Harry's not around to do it. Huh. That sounds awfully familiar, kind of mirroring her role as the Seeker on the Gryffindor Quidditch team. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, it's mentioned that Regulus Black played Seeker on the Slytherin Quidditch team when he was a student. Now, the way that this is mentioned is just kind of out of nowhere. They're looking through his room trying to find clues because they suspect that he may be the RAB who signed the note in the locket. And they find this picture of the Slytherin Quidditch team, and Harry points out that he's sitting where the Seeker sits. Now, there has been no mention up until this point that I've been able to find of the Seeker sitting in a particular spot when they're taking a picture. So that was totally just a detail that was invented in order to tell us that he was a Seeker. Why was it important that he was a Seeker, though? Remember how I said before that I thought there was a connection between chasing after this and chasing after these? Yeah, I think it's definitely not a coincidence that the first person who found and tried to destroy one of Voldemort's Horcruxes was a Seeker. I would almost call it foreshadowing if it didn't happen right in the middle of the big revelation. There's another character who claims to have been a Seeker, but because pretty much everything they say is a lie, I really don't believe it, and that is Gilderoy Lockhart. In Book 2, he tells Harry that he used to play Seeker and that if Harry needs any advice or guidance, he'd be all too happy to provide it. But, you know, it's Lockhart. If his lips are moving, it probably means he's lying. It makes sense, though, that Lockhart would claim to have been a Seeker, and the idea of him being a fake Seeker, as in he pretends to have been one but wasn't, actually fits really well with the idea of him also being a fake hero. He pretends to have done all of these impressive things and defeated trolls and werewolves and vampires and ghouls and all kinds of stuff, but ultimately he's just a fraud who's taking credit for what other people have done. And I don't know if you've noticed, but these characters whose role as a Seeker on a Quidditch team reflects their role in the greater conflict of the story, it's not usually a very glamorous thing. It's usually very difficult and dangerous, and not all that pleasant. Lockhart, though, certainly makes it out to be a very glamorous thing, the idea that he is this, you know, great hero who has dealt with all these dangerous creatures and whatnot. And so, him pretending to have been a Seeker, it works, it fits. Symbolically, it makes sense, even more so than it just being another thing that he's lying about. Speaking of characters who them not being a Seeker is important, I've got a few more as well. Not in the sense of Lockhart, you know, pretending to be, but he probably wasn't really because, you know, he lies all the time. But in terms of characters where them not playing Seeker or playing a Quidditch position other than Seeker is actually pretty important. The first one of these is James Potter. Now, in the movies, James was a Seeker. Ron looks at the plaques, you know, in the Quidditch thing and says, "Harry, you never told me your father was a Seeker too." And of course, Harry didn't know. But in the books, it's never actually said that James played Seeker, just that he played Quidditch. And in fact, the position that he played was Chaser. Now, the difference between Seeker and Chaser, I think, is very representative of one of the big differences between Harry and his father, which is that while his father did fight against Voldemort and did defy him directly 3 times, because that's part of the prophecy, born to those who have thrice defied him, he was never in a leadership role, and he was never, I mean, he was kind of the leader of the Marauders when they were students, but being the leader among a group of 4 friends is very different from being a leader in, like, a group like the Order of the Phoenix or Dumbledore's army, for instance. And he was certainly never any kind of chosen one who was, like, set apart to be the only one that could save the world. He never had that kind of burden on him the way that Harry did. And so I think the fact that he did not play Seeker, he played Quidditch, and it's brought up many times that Harry gets his Quidditch skills from his father. But the fact that he played a different position, I think that's important, not to the plot or anything, but it's important symbolically as far as representing one of the big differences between the two of them. In a very similar way, Newt Scamander, at the very beginning of the first Fantastic Beasts movie, when he's just arrived in New York, he comes upon one of Mary Lou Barebone's rallies, and she spots him in the crowd and talks to him, and she's like, "What brings you to our city? And are you a seeker after truth?" And he responds with, "I'm more of a chaser, really." And I think that aside from being a joke, that if anybody understands, which a lot of people watching the movie would, what a seeker and a chaser are, it's kind of funny for him to respond that way, but I think it also tells a little bit about what kind of protagonist he is, and that he's a very different type than Harry. Harry was the chosen one. Newt is just a guy with a suitcase full of magical creatures. He'll help when he can, but it's not all on him. In fact, we know that he won't be the one to defeat Grindelwald in the end, because that's obviously Dumbledore. He is part of the group in the third movie that people were calling, like, Dumbledore's First Army and whatnot, but just as one of the group members, as one of the people who are in on that plan, not as the leader of it or as the chosen one type. So I think that him saying right up front, "I'm not a seeker, I'm a chaser," that's a clue as to his role in the story. And in that way, it plays on the symbolism that's associated with the role of seeker. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this video. In this video series, I'm talking about symbolism in popular media, and along with Harry Potter, I'm going to be talking about Star Wars, Beauty and the Beast, Titanic, and The Hunger Games. So if you want to see more from me, be sure to subscribe. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday.